A crown is a circle without end, a promise that power will always return to the same hands. But what if that circle is made of thorns? What if every turn of that ring cuts deeper into the head that wears it, and into the history that follows? Welcome back, seekers of dark history. Tonight begins our journey into cursed kings and haunted thrones, a realm where bloodlines are bound by misfortune, and every palace hides its ghosts behind velvet curtains. If you're still listening, remember this. Some kingdoms were not built on stone and law, but on whispers and curses that no mortal could break. They called it the Blood Crown. No mint ever struck its image, no herald dared to draw it. It appeared only in secret chronicles and the terrified murmurs of servants who claimed to have seen its shadow cross the banquet table. The first monarch to wear it promised his people everlasting order. What he gave them instead was a kingdom that bled without wounds. It began in a winter that refused to end. The fields lay frozen and glassy. The rivers crawled beneath their ice like slow serpents. In a capital of spires and gray light, a young king walked alone through a chapel that smelled of smoke and candle grease. He had inherited a realm broken by civil war, families split by loyalty, forests full of ghosts that whispered for revenge. A crown already waited for him, glittering with rubies that looked like eyes when the torches caught them. But the king wanted more than ceremony. He wanted obedience. He wanted the land itself to bow. They said the blood crown was forged in a room without doors. No smith had hammered it. It had appeared all at once, like frost looming on a window pane. Some claimed it was made from coffin nails drawn from traitors' graves. Others swore it came from the cage of a murdered saint. One legend said it was born from a meteor, metal that fell from the heavens, still weeping fire. Whatever the truth, it was said to fit perfectly, as if the skull had been made for it. His council warned him to stay away. They recited the names of old dynasties that had vanished, of thrones that had turned to dust. A crown is a symbol, they said, not a spell. But the king smiled. Symbols, he replied, are the only spells that last. On the night of his coronation, the chapel was filled with nobles expecting gold and grandeur. Instead, they found iron and shadow. The king stepped forward, placed aside the royal diadem of his ancestors, and drew from a black cloth the object of his obsession. The blood crown drank the firelight until it seemed to swallow the room. As he lifted it, a sound spread through the crowd like a gasp, or perhaps the crown itself sighed, remembering. When the iron touched his brow, a tremor passed across his face. A single drop of red traced his temple and fell to the stone floor. Only one courtier noticed, and she would later write that this was the moment the kingdom's luck turned. But the king stood tall and silent, his new crown dark and still. For a time, it seemed as if his strange choice had been blessed. The winter softened, bandits disappeared from the woods, crops sprouted from soil that had been dead for years. He spoke, and men obeyed. It was as if the land itself listened. He became a ruler of precision and mystery, a man whose every word carried the weight of prophecy. But power demands its price. The king began to sleep less. Then, not at all. He claimed the crown steadied his thoughts and wore it even in private. Servants were told never to look directly at him. When they did, they swore the air around him shimmered as though the iron ring burned without flame.
The first omen came at a banquet. A visiting prince, smiling too widely, raised a cup laced with poison. The king paused mid-toast, tilted his head as if hearing a whisper no one else could hear, and set the cup aside. Moments later, the prince was dead. The poison had found its way to the wrong lips. No one could explain how. The king's gaze never faltered. Some said the crown had spoken. As seasons passed, peace hardened into something unnatural. Roads were safe, but laughter was rare. Even children's games fell quiet. Those who defied the law vanished, yet their names were still whispered at night by those who claimed to hear their voices in the wind. A laundress once awoke to her daughter muttering in her sleep, "He's listening. When he wears it, he hears everything." The blood crown was not content to rule through fear. It listened. It remembered promises made and broken, oaths sworn in barns, lies told in the dark, prayers whispered over graves. The weight of those words pressed upon the king until he seemed to move through water. Each night he heard the low hum of 1,000 voices beneath his own. At the harvest rite, he was meant to bless the fields with a branch from the oldest tree. But when he raised the branch, he froze. The wind stopped. The sky dimmed. He turned his head as though someone far underground had called his name. When he returned to the palace, blood streaked down his temple once again. New laws followed, harsh, precise, cold. Treason became not an act, but a thought. Dungeons filled quietly, as if the walls themselves absorbed the screams. The court grew silent, terrified of being overheard by something unseen. Even the torches seemed to burn slower. The royal historian wrote that the king had become an instrument tuned beyond the human ear. He meant it as praise, but an instrument can be played by any hand that dares. Soon the crown began to appear where it shouldn't, in puddles, in mirrors, in the eyes of horses gone still with terror. People who saw it felt a tightening around their heads, a pressure that whispered, "Remember me." No one spoke of it openly. On the first anniversary of his coronation, the king descended into the crypt alone. He spoke aloud, though no one heard the words. When he returned, the candle he'd left behind had burned halfway down, though no wax had melted.
After that night, justice became cruelly specific. The greedy lost sweetness in their crops. The dishonest woke to frost sealing their doors from within. The wicked suffered fates so poetic they could only have been arranged by something listening. The people called it divine justice, but justice is blind. The crown was not. The curse reached its crescendo when the king met a sickly child in the corridor. The boy coughed until his small frame shook. The king, weary yet strangely gentle, laid a hand on the boy's head. The cough stopped instantly. Joy filled the air for a heartbeat. Then a single drop fell from the king's ear, bright red against the marble. He wiped it away and walked on. The boy's mother wept, unsure whether to pray or flee. From that day, the king rationed kindness. Every act of mercy came with pain. He learned to be silent because silence cost nothing. His court imitated him until the whole palace sounded like a tomb filled with polite ghosts. Another winter arrived. Snow fell heavy over the capital. The king stood by the window, staring at the reflection of the crown. "How do I end this without ending everything?" he whispered. The iron tightened, almost lovingly, like a leash. He tried to remove it, once, twice, a third time. Each attempt drew blood. When at last he managed to set it down, relief washed through him like air after drowning. But when he blinked, it was back upon his head, cold and eternal. In despair, he summoned the mapmaker, the only scholar brave enough to chart not just lands, but fears. She drew maps of rumors, ghosts, and the boundaries of nightmares. He asked her to find the edge of his kingdom, the place where the crown's influence ceased. For 3 days she worked. When she returned, her map showed no borders, only a circle enclosing the palace, the city, and every path leading inward. The border, she said softly, is wherever your name is spoken. The king stared at the map and understood. The crown had not bound the land to him, it had bound him to the land. Every oath, every sin, every dream within his realm now lived inside his skull. He was no longer ruler, but prisoner, the beating heart inside a cage of iron. He asked the mapmaker how to break such a bond. She told him, "You don't break nets, you cut them, but only with a blade sharper than justice." That night, the king left the palace in disguise, walking among the poor who warmed their hands by a bridge fire. He asked them for their cruelest story. An old woman, eyes like smoke, told him of a tyrant who starved his people and measured mercy by the length of his shadow. When she finished, the king gave her his cloak. She did not know who he was, and he did not tell her. For the first time in years, he felt human. Back in his chamber, he wrote a new law. Mercy may be given without debt. The quill bled black across the parchment. The crown throbbed, waiting for pain. Instead, he felt peace. The next morning, bells rang by human hands. The markets hummed again. Children shouted without fear. The kingdom exhaled. The blood crown still gleamed on his head, but now its weight seemed honest, a symbol, not a shackle. The king never removed it again. Some said it had learned to rest. Others said it simply waited for the next fool to desire perfection. But the legend of the blood crown spread far beyond his borders. It became the first story in every collection of cursed kings, the first whisper before any new monarch took the throne. If you stand by that same bridge on a winter night, you may hear the old woman's voice and the river below her whispering the same question that haunted him. How do you rule what refuses to forget? And if you catch your reflection in the water and see a ring of iron around your head, do not be afraid. It is only history looking back. Next time, we travel to Europe, where the very thrones themselves learned to whisper, and the kings who sat upon them were never truly alone. They say wood remembers. Every tree that falls carries the echo of every storm it ever survived. Every cut, every scar, is a word carved into its memory. And when that wood is shaped into a throne, a seat of power, pride, and blood, the whispers of the past begin to breathe again. In the forgotten castles of Europe, thrones were not just furniture. They were witnesses, mute judges watching the rise and fall of men who believed themselves gods. And some of them, if you listen long enough, never truly stopped speaking. The most cursed among them was the throne of Weierholm, carved in the year 1324 from a single oak that grew on a hill known as the Gallows Grove. It was a dark tree, heavy with crooked limbs and roots that groped the soil like fingers searching for lost bones. The villagers said that every man who was hanged from its branches left part of his voice inside it. So when the new king ordered it felled to fashion his royal seat, they begged him to reconsider. The tree holds tongues, they warned. You'll sit upon their words. The king only laughed. Then let them speak, he said. A ruler must hear his people. The tree fell at dawn, and the hill stayed silent for the first time in centuries. From its heartwood, the artisans carved a throne, a masterpiece of swirling roots and interwoven faces that seemed almost alive. They say that when the craftsman finished, each of them found a small splinter embedded in his skin, and no matter how deep they dug, they could not remove it.
For years, the throne sat in Weierholm's great hall, gleaming and beautiful. The king ruled with vigor, his reign blessed by harvest and peace. But peace is the heaviest silence of all. On his 40th birthday, as torches flickered and music swelled, the first whisper came. It was faint, so faint that only one servant heard it while sweeping the hall after midnight. A soft murmur, like breath moving through wood. She froze, leaned closer, and heard the sound again. A voice, hoarse and slow, murmuring in a language older than her prayers. When she ran to tell the steward, he dismissed it as wind. But when the morning came, the king found a phrase scratched into the armrest of his throne. Blood for wood, wood for throne. He laughed at first, but when he sat upon it later that day, a chill ran through his body. He swore the wood flexed beneath him, almost pulsing. He looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. That night, he returned alone and sat once more. This time he heard it clearly, a whisper behind his skull, calling him by name. At first, the voice told him small truths, which advisors lied, which noblemen plotted, which allies planned betrayal. And every time he followed its counsel, he found the information to be true. He began to trust the whisper, to depend on it. Soon he could not sit anywhere else. He held his councils in the throne room, even when there was no audience. He slept beside the throne. He would speak softly into its carved ear, and sometimes, when the fire was low and the night was still, he would nod as if something had answered. The kingdom flourished, but the king grew thin. He stopped eating at banquets, claiming food tasted like ashes. His eyes grew ringed with shadow. He would wince at random moments as if someone had shouted in his ear. "They speak all at once now," he muttered to the queen, who dared not ask what he meant.
Then came the day of judgment. A man was accused of conspiring to poison the court. The king ordered him brought before the throne. As the man knelt, pleading for his life, the whisper filled the king's mind like thunder. He is guilty. Without hesitation, the king ordered the man's execution. That night, another whisper came, lower, more urgent. The wrong one died. From that day on, the king's decrees grew erratic. He pardoned murderers and condemned innocents. Ministers argued, then vanished. The throne's carved faces began to change. What had once been delicate etchings of angels now twisted into grimaces that mirrored the king's own expression. When winter came, He forbade fires in the hall, claiming the smoke angered the voices. His courtiers began to wear gloves, not for warmth, but to keep from touching the throne when bowing. Some swore they heard faint whispers even when the king was away, pleading, crying, or laughing in tongues no one recognized. One night, the queen fled the castle with their son. She left behind a note that read, "He no longer rules, the wood does." The king was found the next morning, slumped in his seat, eyes open, lips moving soundlessly. The throne beneath him was warm, almost feverish. When they tried to lift his body away, his hands would not release the armrests. The court physician had to sever his fingers to remove him. They buried him without ceremony and sealed the hall. But when his son, now grown, returned to claim the crown, he found the door ajar. Inside, the throne stood untouched, yet the room smelled of earth and blood. Against all advice, he sat upon it. That night, the kingdom's bells rang without human hands. Within months, madness spread through the royal family. One by one, each successor who dared to sit upon the throne of Verholm fell to paranoia, despair, or suicide. Eventually, the line ended, not in rebellion or invasion, but in silence. After the castle was abandoned, peasants swore they could hear whispers on windy nights drifting down from the ruins. Travelers who sought shelter there claimed that when they sat to rest, they felt a pulse beneath the wood, slow, steady, and alive. Centuries later, the Cursed Throne's legend spread across Europe. In Austria, a golden chair was said to hum softly in the dark. In Spain, a marble seat grew so cold that no fire could warm it. In Bohemia, a throne of black walnut seemed to darken more each year, absorbing the sins of those who ruled upon it. Historians dismissed these tales as superstition, the invention of servants and priests. But revolutions proved otherwise. When mobs stormed palaces, they tore down portraits, burned libraries, and melted crowns. Yet the thrones were always left standing. Perhaps they feared what might awaken if those seats were destroyed, or perhaps, deep down, they knew the truth. A throne does not belong to any one king. It belongs to power itself, and power never dies. It only waits. If you walk through the ruins of Verholm today, the castle is little more than stones and moss, but in the center of the shattered hall, the throne still stands. The oak has turned black as coal, and no bird will perch near it. Locals say if you listen closely, you can hear it breathing. Others claim it speaks the names of kings not yet born. And when the wind passes through its hollow carvings, it sounds like 1,000 voices whispering the same promise that cursed Europe for centuries. The throne remembers. Next time, we travel to France, to the royal court of the Capetians, where a dying man's curse unraveled an entire bloodline and left an empire haunted by its own crown. In every kingdom that ever rose, there came a day when the blood that built it demanded payment. The Capetians of France believed themselves chosen by God, anointed rulers of divine right, untouchable and eternal. But God, it seems, remembers insults more vividly than prayers. The curse of the Capetians began with fire. It was the year 1314. The air above the river Seine was heavy with smoke and incense. On a raised scaffold stood Jacques de Molay, last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, an order of warrior monks who had once fought for faith and fortune in equal measure. Now they were accused of heresy, blasphemy, and unspeakable sin. Their true crime was simpler. They had wealth, and King Philip IV wanted it. The king, tall and golden-haired, was known as Philip the Fair. Fair to look upon, perhaps, but not in judgment. He saw himself as the hand of divine order, the one who would cleanse France of corruption. And so, on that cold March afternoon, as the crowd pressed close to see the heretics burn, the king watched from his horse, his eyes gleaming through the veil of smoke. De Molay's beard caught fire first. The flames climbed greedily up the ropes that bound him, yet he did not scream. Instead, he lifted his face toward the royal balcony and spoke in a voice that cut through the roar of the pyre. "Pope Clement, King Philip, before this year is out, I summon you both to stand before the tribunal of God. And I curse you, your line, your house, and your crown. You will know no peace, nor will your sons. Your kingdom will rot from within." The crowd gasped, some in awe, others in fear. The fire surged, consuming him whole. The smell of burning flesh and sanctity filled the air. The curse had been spoken. Within weeks, Pope Clement was dead, his body swollen and blackened by fever. Before the year ended, Philip too fell ill while hunting in the forest of Fontainebleau. His skin turned pale as wax, his breath short and ragged. They said he saw flames in his dreams and woke screaming the Templar's name. He died choking on his own tongue. But the curse did not stop with him. It spread, like rot through wood, through every branch of his bloodline.
Philip's eldest son, Louis X, inherited the throne, and with it, the weight of a father's sins. He was young, restless, desperate to prove himself. Within 2 years, he was dead, poisoned, they said, by wine chilled with ice. His wife followed soon after, strangled in prison. The crown passed to Philip's second son, Philip V, who seized power from his niece under the guise of preserving order. He ruled with paranoia, hearing whispers in the dark corridors of the palace. His nights were sleepless. His priests reported him muttering confessions to unseen listeners. He too died childless, leaving behind only silence. Then came Charles IV, the last of the direct Capetian kings. He took the throne amid famine, flood, and plague. His queen was barren, his people starving, his kingdom trembling under the weight of divine judgment. On his deathbed, Charles raved that he could hear the voice of Jacques de Molay calling from the flames, "The line ends with you." And so it did. When Charles died without an heir, France was thrown into chaos. The crown passed through cousins and claimants, igniting the spark that would become the 100 Years' War. The English and French kings both claimed descent from the cursed line, and so, for generations, the curse devoured Europe in the form of endless war, famine, and plague. Chroniclers of the time noted strange signs. Lightning struck the roof of Notre Dame during the coronation of Charles's nephew. A royal chapel collapsed in the night without wind or storm. Priests claimed to smell ash whenever the Capetian name was spoken during Mass. Even centuries later, the shadow of the Templars' fire lingered. Louis XVI, the last king of France before the Revolution, refused to hear the name Jacques de Molay in his court. But curses are not deterred by denial. When the guillotine blade fell in 1793, the crowd swore the wind carried a single whisper through the square: justice. Historians may dismiss it as coincidence, but France remembers differently. In the old city of Paris,
near the island where Desmoulins burned, there stands a marker on the riverbank. Locals say that at dusk, when the mist rises from the water, a faint figure appears, hooded, bound, his hands still charred. He stares toward the city's heart, where kings once ruled, and where now none rule.
The Capetian curse is more than a ghost story. It is a warning written in royal blood, that every throne, no matter how gilded, is built upon the bones of those who fell before it. Divine right may promise eternity, but eternity has a cruel sense of irony. Some scholars claim the curse ended with the revolution. Others insist it only changed shape. For every French leader since, from emperors to presidents, has faced downfall, exile, or death before peace. The guillotine may have claimed the last king, but the whisper that doomed him still lingers in the corridors of power. And on quiet nights, when the bells of Paris toll, some say you can hear another bell answering from the Seine, a slow, distant toll that sounds like metal striking bone. A reminder that the dead do not forgive, and that crowns, once cursed, never truly come clean. Next time, we travel east, to the forgotten empire of the Red Moon, where kings rose and fell according to the blood-colored sky and a celestial omen doomed an entire dynasty to vanish without a trace. In the chronicles of forgotten empires, there are names that time itself refuses to speak aloud. They vanish from maps, from monuments, from memory, yet their ruins still bleed light under a crimson sky. One such empire was the kingdom of the Red Moon, a dynasty born from prophecy and extinguished by the same celestial fire that crowned it. Long before Europe's kings learned to fear their own thrones, far beyond the western seas, there rose a civilization built upon silence and stars. The empire of the Red Moon stretched across mountains and rivers like veins of blood on the earth. Its people believed the moon was not a lantern of light, but a living eye, watching, judging, hungering. Their first emperor, Genroi of the Scarlet Sky, was born beneath an omen. On the night of his birth, the moon turned blood red and lingered longer than any astrologer had ever seen. The midwives fled in terror, whispering that the heavens had opened an unholy gate. But the emperor's mother, serene and pale, held her child and whispered, "The gods have marked you. You will never die." He did not die, at least not as men do. Genrou grew into a conqueror unmatched. He spoke of the moon as if it were his father and claimed to see its reflection in every blade he drew. He waged war under its light, and wherever he rode, the rivers ran red. Yet his armies never lost, and the moon, ever crimson on the nights of his victories, became his banner. The court astrologers wrote that his reign would last until the moon's eye closes. And so, for 50 years, it remained open. Genrou built temples of white stone that glowed in moonlight. He commanded his priests to bleed themselves in ritual, saying the moon hungered for its own reflection. On nights of eclipse, the people gathered in the capital square, kneeling in silence as the red light washed over them. It was said that if you looked closely, you could see faces moving in the shadow. Faces of those who had been sacrificed, staring back from the darkened sky. But the moon does not grant favor freely. In his later years, Genrou began to dream of a figure draped in silver, standing upon the horizon. Each time he dreamed it, another of his generals died suddenly, some in their sleep, others in the field. The emperor took it as a warning. He ordered new rituals, deeper sacrifices. Yet the figure continued to appear,
closer each night, its faceless head tilted as though listening. When the emperor finally died, the moon vanished from the sky for 3 nights. The priests took it as a sign that he had ascended to heaven. The people took it as a curse. His tomb, built beneath the largest lunar temple, was sealed with stones said to hum in the dark. The inscription carved into the gate read, "He lives within the eye of the moon." His descendants ruled under that same crimson light, each believing themselves chosen, each hungering for the power that consumed him. With every eclipse, they offered blood to the heavens. At first, criminals, then nobles, then children. The empire became a theater of sacrifice, a machine that fed on its own pulse. By the 10th ruler, Emperor Liang, the ceremonies had turned grotesque. He claimed that the moon's reflection in the temple's pool spoke to him directly. He ordered its waters replaced with the blood of the innocent. When an advisor begged him to stop, the emperor replied, "Do you not see? The moon grows brighter with every offering. Would you have us fall into darkness?" But the moon does not brighten. It only watches.
That year, a red moon rose brighter than any before. It hung in the sky for 3 nights and refused to wane. The emperor saw it as a sign of immortality. He ordered the city sealed, no one to enter, no one to leave, until the gods revealed their will. On the 4th night, the light changed. The moon dimmed, not with shadow, but as if it were closing its eye. The priests began to scream. Birds fell dead from the sky. The emperor ran to the temple balcony to pray and stopped. The pool below reflected not the moon, but faces, thousands of them, the dead he had sacrificed, staring upward in silence. When dawn came, the capital was gone, not destroyed, not burned, gone. The surrounding villages found only empty streets, abandoned garments, and a faint red dust that shimmered in the sunlight like ash. The temple's white stone had turned black. The throne room was filled with dried petals and bones arranged in the shape of a crescent. They say the moon that night wept light over the ruins, as though mourning the end of its favorite child. Generations later, nomads crossing the region claimed to see a city flickering on the horizon. There, one heartbeat, gone the next. Scholars called it a mirage. The locals called it the red reflection. When the blood moon returns, they said, the city breathes again, and the emperor walks its streets, his eyes hollow and glowing like 2 shards of sky. No map records the empire of the red moon now. Its language has no living speaker. Its temples are swallowed by dust and silence. Yet, when the crimson moon rises over the eastern deserts, the earth itself seems to tremble, and wolves refuse to howl. In that silence lies the legacy of Zenri's dynasty, an empire that mistook the watching sky for a god, and the god's hunger for love. The curse of the red moon did not vanish, it migrated. For those who gaze too long at the moonlight, who let ambition burn brighter than compassion, always meet the same fate, consumed by the reflection they worship. For the moon, after all, has never shone on its own. It only mirrors the light of others, until that light runs out. Next time, we return to England, where beauty and blood entwined in the court of Henry VIII, and a queen's restless spirit still haunts the corridors of power. The story of the Tudors' ghost bride awaits.
England has never lacked for ghosts. Its soil is layered with centuries of betrayal, its castles built on secrets, its rivers fed by tears of forgotten queens. But among all the spirits said to wander its royal halls, none lingers more sorrowfully
or more persistently than the young woman they called the Tudor's ghost bride. Her name was Catherine Howard, fifth wife to King Henry VIII, barely 17 when she caught the king's eye, radiant with youth and laughter in a court already drowned in fear. She arrived like sunlight after years of storms, and for a moment even the monstrous heart of Henry softened. But sunlight does not last in a kingdom built on shadow. When Catherine first entered the palace, she was little more than a girl. Her cousin was Anne Boleyn, another queen who had met the executioner's blade. Yet Catherine believed her beauty could charm away the king's temper, that her warmth could soothe the man who had cast aside wives like wilted roses. For a time, it worked. Henry showered her with jewels, affection, and the title Rose Without a Thorn. The court whispered that the old lion had found joy again. The king, once plagued with illness and paranoia, laughed at banquets, played music, even danced. But beneath every laugh echoed the soft warning of history. The Tudors were never blessed with happy queens. The first rumors came quietly. A letter here, a servant's gossip there. Whispers of an old suitor, Francis Derham, a man from Catherine's youth who had known her before she was queen. Then, worse still, talk of Thomas Culpeper, a handsome courtier often seen near her chambers. Whether these were true affairs or the cruel inventions of jealous courtiers, no one can say. In Henry's court, rumor was a weapon sharper than any sword. When the truth, or what passed for it, reached the king, the transformation was terrifying. Henry's laughter died. His heart, swollen from years of indulgence, turned to stone. He locked himself away, refusing to eat or speak. The courtiers whispered that he cried, though no one dared to say it aloud. Then came the orders.
Catherine was dragged from her bed in the early hours of morning, still wrapped in silk and confusion. She was accused of adultery, treason, and sin. She pleaded her innocence, insisting that she had only ever loved the king. But mercy had long since fled that palace. They took her to the Tower of London, where the Thames laps against the walls like a slow heartbeat. There, in the gray chill of November, she awaited her fate. The guards said she moved like a ghost even before she died, silent, drifting through the corridors, pausing to pray at every doorway. On the night before her execution, Catherine made a strange request. She asked that the executioner's block be brought to her cell so she could practice how to kneel. The guards hesitated, but her calmness unnerved them, and they obeyed. She touched the wood, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I die a queen, but I wish I had been a better one." At dawn, she walked to the scaffold, dressed in white, her hair loose around her shoulders. Witnesses said she looked like a bride going to her wedding, not her death. When the blade fell, a wind swept through the courtyard, scattering the straw that had been laid to soak her blood. The crowd fell silent, for even the crows would not cry. But Catherine's story did not end there. Soon after her death, guards in the tower began reporting strange occurrences. At night, footsteps echoed through the corridor of the Queen's house, soft and hurried, as though someone were running for her life. Then came the sobbing, quiet at first, then piercing. One sentry swore he saw a pale figure gliding toward him, hands clasped at her throat, eyes wide with terror. She vanished before his torch reached her. The legend grew. Servants refused to work alone after dark.
Nobles staying in the tower's upper chambers spoke of cold gusts of air and the faint scent of roses, Catherine's favorite perfume, drifting through locked doors. Some said they saw her kneeling, practicing once again how to die. When Henry himself visited the tower years later, he reportedly demanded that all doors be kept open and all candles burning. "I'll not have her ghost creeping in shadows," he said. But the shadows came anyway. Even he could not keep her from haunting him.
After his death, stories of Catherine spread to other royal houses. At Hampton Court Palace, where she had once danced, visitors still claim to hear her running through the gallery that now bears her name, the Haunted Gallery, crying, "Mercy, mercy, my lord," before vanishing into the air. Guards who patrolled at night refuse to linger there, for they say her screams echo not in their ears, but in their bones. Historians will tell you it's nonsense. They'll say the cold spots are drafts, the footsteps are tricks of old wood, the cries are the creak of settling stone. But history is built on denial, and denial has never stopped the dead from speaking. What makes Catherine's haunting so powerful is not revenge, it's grief. She was not a schemer or a seductress, as her enemies claimed. She was a child, thrust into a crown too heavy for her heart. Her spirit lingers not to torment, but to remember. To remind the living that innocence offers no protection in the games of kings. 5 centuries have passed, and yet, on cold winter nights, the tower guards still report hearing footsteps, bare, light, and urgent, racing down the long corridor toward the chapel where she was condemned. No matter how many times they follow the sound, it always ends the same way. A soft gasp, a thud, and silence. Catherine Howard, the Tudors' ghost bride, remains England's most enduring royal spectre. She haunts not only stone and shadow, but the conscience of power itself. Every monarch who walks those halls feels the echo of her final plea, mercy, and the weight of a crown that too often demands blood before love. The roses she once wore have long since turned to dust, but their scent, they say, still lingers in the air, drifting through time like a memory that refuses to fade. And when the moonlight touches the tower's windows, for a fleeting moment, it glows the color of her hair, bright, innocent, and forever trapped between love and death. Next time, we travel to Russia, to the palaces of the Tsars, where paranoia became prophecy, and poison was only one of the many ways a crown could kill. The story of the poisoned throne of Moscow awaits.
Power in Russia has always carried the taste of metal, iron, ice, and blood. From the czars of old to the empires that rose after, the throne of Moscow was never just a seat of rule. It was a weapon, a curse, and sometimes a cup filled with poison. They called it the Silver Seat, though there was nothing pure about it. Forged during the reign of Tsar Ivan IV, known to history as Ivan the Terrible, it was said to be made from the melted relics of conquered churches, bound together with mercury and silver dust. Ivan believed the throne would make him invincible, that sitting upon sanctified metal would bind heaven and earth beneath his will. But heaven, it seems, takes offense when its relics are defiled. The legend began in the year 1565, when the Tsar declared himself the chosen scourge of God. He formed the Oprinchina, his private army of black-robed riders who swept across the land, purging traitors both real and imagined. They burned towns, executed nobles, and dragged the guilty and innocent alike before the Silver Seat, where judgment fell swift and cruel. The throne itself gleamed with unnatural light. Court alchemists said it contained no ordinary silver. It was mixed with mercury, a substance that mirrored the moon and reflected human fear. They warned the Tsar that mercury was dangerous, that it seeped through the skin and into the mind. But Ivan only smiled. "Then let it seep into my enemies." For years he ruled from that throne, his temper sharp and his gaze distant, as if he saw something beyond the room, something only he could hear. Witnesses wrote that when he sat upon it, his eyes changed color, paling until they reflected the same cold shimmer as the metal beneath him. Then came the first death. A trusted advisor, Prince Kurbsky, fell suddenly ill after kneeling before the Tsar during an audience. His skin turned pale, his hair came out in clumps, and within days he was dead. Others followed, secretaries, generals, even servants who brushed against the armrests while cleaning. All complained of dizziness, trembling, and visions of white fire. The physicians called it fever. The priests called it divine wrath. But the whispers among the courtiers spoke of something darker, that the throne itself was killing them.
And perhaps it was. Ivan began to grow erratic. He claimed angels spoke to him through the silver, their voices echoing from the metal like whispers through water. At times, he laughed with no one in the room. At others, he screamed at shadows. His courtiers stood frozen in silence, unsure whether to cross themselves or run. He started to suspect his own family. His wife, Anastasia, once the only person who could calm him, fell ill under strange circumstances, her body weakened, her breath shallow. She died within weeks, and Ivan swore she had been poisoned. He accused his boyars, his priests, his doctors, every man who dared meet his eyes. But some said he never looked outward for the killer, because, deep down, he already knew. The poison had come from his throne. The Tsar grew more violent with each passing year. His hands shook, his teeth darkened. He complained of seeing silver dust in his wine and the faces of the dead in his reflection. The throne room filled with a sour metallic scent, heavy and choking. Even his loyal guards began to fear approaching him. One night, in a fit of rage, Ivan struck his eldest son, the Tsarevich, across the skull with his scepter. The blow killed him instantly. The Tsar fell to his knees, cradling his son's body and screaming until dawn. Those who witnessed it said the throne behind him began to hum, a low, dreadful vibration that made the walls tremble. Some swore the sound was laughter. After that night, Ivan changed. He moved the silver seat into a private chamber and ordered that no one else be allowed to touch it. He sat there for hours, motionless, his crown tilted forward, his lips moving in silent conversation. Servants reported hearing murmurs through the door, as if two voices spoke at once, one human, one metallic. When he finally died in 1584, he was found seated upon the throne, his face gray and frozen in an expression of shock. His hand gripped the armrest so tightly that his nails had broken against it. On the metal beneath his body, where his skin had touched, the silver had blackened. The doctors who examined him fell ill within days. One lost his sight, another his sanity. The chamber was sealed, the throne left untouched. Yet when the next Tsar, Boris Godunov, took the palace, he ordered it uncovered. Against the priest's warnings, he claimed the curse was superstition. He sat upon it only once. Within a year, his reign collapsed in famine, rebellion, and madness. His final words, whispered before he took his own life, were, "It whispers still." Over the centuries, the silver seat became a secret passed between rulers.
Some claimed it had been destroyed, melted down to erase its poison. Others believed it was merely hidden, buried beneath the Kremlin or locked within one of the Tsar's forgotten vaults. But rumors persisted. During the Romanov reign, palace attendants sometimes reported seeing a faint glow beneath the floorboards of the old throne room, an eerie silvery light that flickered like a
Moonlight trapped under ice. When the Tsar and his son fell mysteriously ill, an old servant muttered, "The throne breathes again." She was dismissed the next morning and never seen again. Today, the Kremlin's modern halls shine with restored grandeur. Tourists wander where emperors once ruled, unaware of what lies beneath their feet. But some guards, when walking alone at night, speak of a cold draft rising from the cracks in the stone, air that smells faintly of metal and decay. They say if you press your ear to the floor, you can hear something humming far below. The story of the poisoned throne is not just one of mercury and madness, but of the sickness that power itself brings. Ivan the Terrible believed he had fused the sacred with the sovereign, the divine with the mortal. Instead, he fused corruption with his soul and left behind a curse that outlived him by centuries. Perhaps the throne still waits beneath Moscow, its surface darkened and its metal hungry. Perhaps it sleeps, dreaming of the weight of another ruler. And when it is found again, when another hand dares to polish its surface and sit upon it, the silver will awaken. And once more, the throne will whisper. Next time, we travel to the sands of Egypt, where kings tried to bury their curses with them, and grave robbers learned that some tombs were never meant to be opened. The pharaoh's blight awaits. The desert does not forget. Beneath its endless dunes lie the bones of empires, the dreams of gods, and the curses of kings. Every grain of sand carries a whisper of something buried, a secret, a warning, a promise. And of all the curses that history has ever feared, none has endured so completely as those born in the tombs of the pharaohs. They called it the pharaoh's blight, a shadow that followed those who disturbed the dead. To the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife was not a myth, it was a destination. And their kings prepared for it with the precision of generals and the obsession of madmen. They built tombs vast as cities, filled them with treasures, food, weapons, and spells. They mummified their bodies, bound their souls with sacred words, and sealed themselves away with the belief that they had defeated time itself. But death, like power, invites envy. Thousands of years after those tombs were sealed, new kings, kings of greed, of curiosity, of science, came looking for what was never meant to be found.
The story begins in 1922 with Howard Carter's discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. The world still remembers the wonder of that moment, the sealed door, the golden statues, the glitter of eternity under the light of a single candle. When asked what he saw through the breach, Carter's words were simple, wonderful things. But wonder quickly turned to dread. Within months of the tomb's opening, Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's patron, was dead. His mosquito bite had become infected. Fever seized him in the night. At the exact moment he died, all the lights in Cairo flickered out. His dog, hundreds of miles away in England, howled once and dropped dead. The newspapers called it the mummy's curse. Soon, others followed. Visitors, journalists, and workers connected to the dig died in strange accidents. A man was poisoned by an insect bite. Another suffocated in his sleep. One was found drowned in his own bath. Skeptics dismissed it all as coincidence,
But even coincidences have a rhythm. Egypt's old priests had a word for this rhythm, Heka, the binding power of words and will. It was not magic as we imagine it, but something older, more precise. They believed that a name spoken wrongly, a spell broken, could unleash imbalance, and to disturb a tomb was to break the oldest balance of all. Yet Tutankhamun's tomb was not the first to curse the living. Centuries earlier, in the Valley of the Kings, an inscription carved upon a lesser-known sarcophagus had warned, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the pharaoh." Archaeologists who ignored it found their expedition plagued by disasters, sandstorms that erased camps overnight, illness that swept through the crew, and voices that echoed through tunnels when no one stood there. One explorer wrote in his journal, "The air itself feels watchful. The deeper we go, the heavier it grows." His entry ended abruptly, the ink smeared by something that looked like a handprint. He was found 2 days later at the bottom of a shaft, his neck broken. The Egyptians never called it a curse. To them, it was simply justice. The pharaohs had earned eternal life, and anyone who trespassed on their domain was stealing immortality. What the living saw as superstition, the ancients saw as law. Even in death, the pharaohs ruled.
But the pharaoh's blight was not confined to explorers and scholars. It infected history itself. Every empire that plundered Egypt seemed to meet its own downfall soon after. The Greeks, who looted the temples of Luxor, were defeated by Rome. The Romans, who carried mummies to their villas, were destroyed by barbarians. Napoleon's soldiers, who blasted open tombs with gunpowder, found their armies buried in the sands of the East. Curses, after all, do not kill instantly. They wait. They rot bloodlines, unravel empires, and whisper madness into the minds of those who believe they are safe. There are records from the 1800s of Victorian collectors who purchased mummies for their parlors. They hosted unwrapping parties where guests watched as the bandages of the dead were peeled away. Within weeks, guests began to die, some from fever, some by misfortune. One woman claimed she awoke at night to find a figure standing by her bed, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The next morning, she was found lifeless, her expression frozen in terror. The museum curators who inherited those artifacts fared no better. Strange illnesses spread through staff rooms. Display glass cracked without reason. One curator's hair turned white overnight. The British Museum, even now, holds a sarcophagus known among staff as the Unlucky Mummy, a relic so feared that guards refuse to work near it after dark. Travelers have reported its image appearing in photographs where it should not exist. The curse, it seems, adapts. Scientists have tried to explain it: ancient bacteria, toxic mold, coincidence. But science only measures symptoms, not intention. The pharaoh's blight was never about disease. It was about ownership. Every grain of sand, every hieroglyph, every bone belonged to the dead. When the living took them, they inherited not the glory of Egypt, but its wrath. And yet the living never learn.
In recent years, new excavations have begun deep beneath Saqqara. Drones fly where men once crawled. Cameras pierce tombs that had been sealed for millennia.
The archaeologists who work there speak of strange equipment malfunctions, batteries dying in perfect sequence, voices caught on audio where no one was present. One worker described a cold breath down his neck in a chamber sealed for 4,000 years. It wasn't air, he said. It was awareness. They laughed when he quit the next day, but when the footage from his camera was reviewed, the laughter stopped. As the camera turned toward a golden sarcophagus, a whisper slid through the static, faint, almost human. "Leave us." The modern world calls it superstition, but superstition is only faith in disguise. The pharaoh's blight is not about revenge, it is about memory. The ancients believed that to be forgotten was the second death. The curse, then, is not meant to destroy, it is meant to remind. Every death, every whisper, every tragedy says the same thing: you are trespassing on eternity. When the desert wind rises at dusk, sweeping through the Valley of the Kings, the sand shifts like the breathing of a giant buried beneath the surface. The air hums with voices too faint to decipher, and if you listen long enough, you can almost hear the question they ask every intruder. How long do you think your name will last? The pharaohs are patient. Time, after all, is their kingdom. Next time, we journey into the courts of Renaissance Europe, where love became necromancy, and one queen dared to speak to the dead. The tale of the queen who spoke to the dead awaits. In every royal court, there are secrets whispered behind silk fans and candle smoke, alliances made in shadows, betrayals sealed with wine. But once, in the heart of Renaissance Europe, there was a queen whose secret went deeper than politics or sin. She did not merely conspire with the living, she spoke with the dead. Her name was Isabella de Castrovane, though the world remembers her by another title, the Whispering Queen. She ruled a small kingdom in northern Italy during the 1500s, a land of marble churches, crimson wine, and endless wars. Her husband, King Rinaldo, was a man of ambition and paranoia. He surrounded himself with soldiers and priests, convinced that every smile hid treachery. Isabella, younger by 15 years, was his opposite, elegant, curious, and too intelligent for the world she was born into. It began, as most curses do, with grief. The queen's only child, a boy of 8, fell ill one winter with a fever that no physician could name. They prayed, they burned incense, they summoned doctors from Florence and Venice. Nothing helped. When he died, Isabella locked herself in the royal chapel and did not emerge for 3 days. When she finally stepped out, her eyes had changed. The court noticed it immediately. They said her gaze was distant, as if she were looking not at the world, but through it. Servants whispered that she spoke softly to herself at night, and that when she did, the candles in her chamber flickered toward her voice. Rinaldo demanded she move on, but Isabella refused. "If the church will not let me speak to my son, then I will find another who will." One evening, she summoned a scholar from Naples, Giovanni delle Ombre, a man rumored to possess forbidden knowledge. He was neither priest nor magician, but something in between. The court feared him instantly. His eyes were too calm, his words too precise. He taught Isabella to listen, not with her ears, but with her pulse. He showed her how to place her hands upon stone, how to draw a circle of salt and blood, and how to whisper a name until silence replied. At first, there was nothing. Then one night, while she sat alone in her chamber, she heard it, a breath, a child's sigh. Then, faintly, her son's voice, "Mother?" The palace changed after that. Isabella stopped attending court. She no longer joined her husband for dinner or counsel. Her chamber windows were always shuttered. Her candles burned low and strange. Servants heard voices in her room, men, women, children, all whispering at once. The queen began writing letters in languages no one could read. When the king confronted her, she smiled faintly. "I have spoken to him," she said. "He forgives me." Rinaldo raged, accusing her of heresy, but she had grown untouchable. The people adored her, calling her the Queen of Light for the calm she brought to the city. Crops prospered, sickness faded, and peace returned. Even the most skeptical began to wonder, had her communion with the dead brought blessings to the living? But heaven's patience is short. During Easter Mass, as the choir sang and incense filled the air, Isabella collapsed. Witnesses claimed a shadow moved across her face, thin, deliberate, almost human. When she awoke, she spoke in a voice not her own. She whispered, "He is not alone. They are all awake now." From that day, strange things began to happen. Bells rang at midnight with no hands upon them. Portraits wept resin from their painted eyes. The king's counselors dreamed of children whispering from under their beds. And in the royal chapel the air grew cold even when candles burned high. Rinaldo's fear turned to fury. He ordered Giovanni delle Ombre arrested and executed for witchcraft. When soldiers broke into the scholar's home, they found no man, only a pile of manuscripts, written in circles that never ended. That night, Isabella vanished. The guards swore the door to her chamber was locked from the inside. Yet when they entered, the room was empty. No sign of struggle, no footprints, only a single word carved into the marble floor. "Listen."
The king ordered the palace searched, the river dragged, the wells emptied, but the queen was gone. Weeks later, a maid discovered her crown on the altar of the chapel, resting on a child's skull. Around it, every candle had burned itself down to the same height. The smell of roses hung in the air. The court buried the crown and sealed the chapel. Rinaldo ruled alone for 3 years, growing ever more paranoid, until he too was found dead, his body cold, his mouth open as though answering a voice no one else could hear. His last words, scribbled on the wall in ash, read, "She never stopped speaking." Centuries passed, the palace fell into ruin, its marble floors split by roots and time. Yet travelers who visit the site say that if they stand within the old chapel at dusk, the air thickens, the walls seem to breathe, and if they whisper any name at all, they will hear a voice answer softly from the dark, asking, "Who shall I send for you?" The story of Isabella de Castrovan became legend, a queen who defied heaven and opened a door that would not close. Her crown, they say, was never found. Some claim it was melted down, others that it rests still upon her spectral head, gleaming faintly when the moonlight strikes the chapel window. But among historians and mystics alike, one thing is certain. She was not mad. She was listening. And perhaps she still is. When storms pass over northern Italy, lightning often strikes the ruins of her castle first, as if drawn to her memory. In those moments, the villagers claim they can hear a woman's voice woven into the thunder, calling not for her lost child, but for the living who dared to disturb her peace. The queen who spoke to the dead was not the first to summon ghosts, nor the last. but her legacy endures wherever grief and power meet, reminding us that love does not fade with death. It only changes its kung. Next time, we journey east again, into the mist-shrouded lands of the Orient, where a dynasty was bound by forbidden rituals and royal sin. The story of the Black Palace of the Orient awaits.
There were palaces that gleamed beneath the sun, golden, open, proud. And then there are others, built not for daylight, but for secrets. Hidden behind mountains and fog, these are the homes of kings who wish to rule unseen. Of all these shadowed empires, none was more feared or more mysterious than the dynasty of the Black Palace. Its real name has been lost to time. The scrolls that mention it have no country, no coordinates, only warnings. Scholars argue it stood somewhere in the east, beyond the known empires, a kingdom swallowed by jungles and rain. Those who found it did not return. Those who dreamed of it awoke with blood on their hands. The Black Palace was said to have been built in silence. Not one hammer, not one chisel, not one human cry was heard during its construction. The legend claims the king who ordered it, Emperor Zhao Yunxian, made a pact with the unseen. He offered 1,000 slaves to the darkness beneath the earth in exchange for an army that never slept. And when the dawn came, the palace stood complete, its walls obsidian, its gates sealed with strange sigils that shimmered when touched by moonlight. The emperor ruled from that shadowed fortress for 40 years. No foreign ambassador ever entered its halls. No map ever showed its gates. The palace appeared only once every 10 years, when the mists cleared and the jungle parted like curtains before a stage. Then, as if remembering its own shame, the earth swallowed it again. Inside, life was an echo of death. The corridors were said to absorb sound. No footstep carried, no voice lingered. Even music died before reaching the ceiling. The servants, pale and silent, moved like drifting ghosts. They were not allowed to speak in the emperor's presence. He believed the human tongue corrupted purity. The court records that survived, written by trembling scribes, described nights that stretched endlessly. Banquets where the food was served cold because it had been blessed by darkness. Dancers veiled in black silk, moving to no music, and at the head of it all, Zhao Yunshan, the king of silence, watching with eyes that never seemed to blink. He had been born under a lunar eclipse, and the priests foretold that his reign would mirror it, brightness consumed by shadow. The prophecy haunted him. He sought to outwit it by building the Black Palace, a place where the sun would never touch him, where his fate would forget to find him. But fate, like light, always finds a way through cracks. The first omen came on a night of heavy rain. Lightning struck the outer walls, and for the first time the palace echoed. The sound of thunder rolled through the corridors like laughter. The emperor took it as mockery. The next morning, the court astrologers were executed for failing to predict the storm. The second omen came from within. One of the servants, mute from birth, was found dead in the garden pond, her eyes open, her reflection still shimmering in the water. In her hand was a piece of parchment, soaked and unreadable, except for one symbol, a black circle pierced by a single white line. The emperor recognized it instantly. It was the mark of his childhood prophecy, the eclipse that would end his dynasty. After that, he forbade mirrors. No water was allowed to stand still. Every reflective surface was shattered or drained. But even darkness has its reflections. The legend says that one night, Zhao Yunxian sat alone upon his throne and felt a breath on his neck. When he turned, there was no one.
Then he heard a voice, not loud, but near, as if whispered from inside his own bones. "The walls remember," it said. From that night on, he began to see shadows moving where there was no light. They gathered at the edges of his vision, servants without faces, courtiers without eyes. He spoke to them, and they listened. Soon the living courtiers realized the emperor no longer needed them. He gave orders to no one visible. Decisions appeared written on scrolls sealed with black wax. The empire continued, but its heart had turned hollow. When his queen died, the emperor refused to bury her. Instead, he commanded that her body be embalmed and placed beside his throne, veiled in silk. He spoke to her each evening as if she still answered. Servants claimed the veil sometimes moved as though stirred by breath.
The people outside the palace whispered of a curse. Those who lived near the jungle swore they heard weeping on nights when the moon was gone. Travelers told stories of ghostly lights floating through the trees, lanterns carried by invisible hands. And then, one year, the palace did not reappear. Decades passed. Dynasties fell. The world forgot Zhao Yunxian's name. But explorers in later centuries, hunters, missionaries, wanderers, spoke of finding black stones deep in the forest, carved with symbols that burned to the touch. One missionary wrote of a staircase descending into darkness that breathed like something alive. His final entry read, "I heard them singing beneath the earth." No one ever found him. Modern archaeologists dismiss the story as myth, yet satellite images have shown strange geometric shapes beneath the vegetation, impossibly regular, eerily symmetrical. When one team tried to excavate, their instruments malfunctioned, compasses spun, batteries drained, and a low hum filled the air. The team leader wrote later, "I heard something, not sound, it was pressure, as if the ground wanted us to stop listening." The site was abandoned. The jungle reclaimed it, as it always does. They say that every few decades, when the mists part and the moon turns red, travelers in that region hear something impossible. Bells ringing deep below the soil, too far down for any temple, too slow for any clock. Some claim they are warning bells. Others believe they are invitations. As for the Black Palace itself, some say it was swallowed by the earth. Others that it was never built at all, but merely summoned by the emperor's fear. Perhaps it was both. A palace not of stone, but of guilt. A kingdom not ruled by men, but by silence. And if you listen carefully, on nights without stars, you may hear what the emperor heard in his final hours. A voice in the dark, neither cruel nor kind, whispering from within the ground. You tried to hide from the light, but the light remembers. The Black Palace was never destroyed. It was absorbed by the shadows that built it, by the jungle that loved it, by the darkness that all kings eventually serve. Next time, we cross the waters to the floating kingdom of Venice, where beauty and betrayal met beneath the mask of the sea. The haunting story of the drowned Prince of Venice awaits.
Venice was born from water, and water has never stopped trying to reclaim it. The city floats like a dream upon the lagoon, half reality, half reflection. Its palaces shimmer upon the surface like ghosts pretending to be stone. Its bells toll not for the living, but for memory. And among all its stories of passion, power, and loss,
None chills the heart more than that of the drowned prince. He was born in the spring of 1576, the son of Doge Lorenzo Contarini, a ruler beloved for his wisdom and cursed for his pride. The boy was named Marco, and from birth it was said the water loved him too much. He learned to swim before he could walk, could spend hours watching the tides roll against the marble foundations of the palazzo. "The lagoon listens to him," his nurses whispered, "and one day it will call him home." The prophecy seemed harmless at first, a sailor's superstition in a city of saints and sinners, but Venice, for all her beauty, has never belonged to the saints. As Marco grew, the city grew stranger around him. Venice was dying in elegance, her nobility rotting behind silken masks, her merchants drowning in their own indulgence. The young prince, though Venice had no kings by name, was the closest thing to one. He was admired, adored, and envied. He spoke 3 languages, painted like a master, and navigated the labyrinthine canals as if guided by invisible hands. When he turned 20, the Doge began grooming him to rule. But the old man's counselors despised the idea. They saw in Marco not a leader, but an omen. "They listen too closely to the sea," they said. "They forget that we are men, not fish." Their fear grew into plots, and the city's waters listened. On the night of the feast of San Marco, the Doge held a grand masquerade. Candles glowed upon the canals like a trail of stars, and gondolas drifted past the palace in slow procession. Marco, masked in white, danced among nobles and courtesans, unaware that his fate was already written in the tide.
Just before midnight, a stranger approached him, tall, cloaked, his mask black and featureless. He offered Marco a glass of dark wine and whispered, "To the future of Venice." The prince drank, smiled, and within an hour began to pale. They said he staggered to the balcony overlooking the Grand Canal, gasping for breath as the moonlight broke across the water. Then, without a sound, he fell. Some said he leapt. Others swore unseen hands pushed him. The lagoon closed over him without a splash. His body was never found. The next morning, the canals ran still. The fish vanished. The air smelled of salt and iron. And in the Doge's chambers, every mirror shattered at once. The old ruler refused to believe his son was dead. For months, he ordered divers into the lagoon. They returned empty-handed, pale, trembling. One swore he had seen a pale face staring up from beneath the silt, eyes open, lips moving. He was not breathing, the diver said, but he was speaking. The Doge shut himself away in grief. The city changed. Fog thickened. Trade faltered. Those who walked the narrow streets after dark spoke of hearing water lapping where there was no canal, footsteps following when bridges were empty. The Doge's servants claimed to hear singing at night, a low, mournful song that seemed to come from beneath the palace floors. Then, one evening, the Doge disappeared. His robes were found by the balcony, wet and heavy with salt. The guards said the tide was unusually high that night, and the water seemed to shimmer like glass. The next day, a single white mask was found floating in the canal. It belonged to the prince. Venice whispered that the lagoon had taken back its child. From then on, strange things began to happen on the water,
Gondoliers avoided certain routes, especially near the old Contarini Palace. They said a pale figure could be seen gliding beneath the surface, hair flowing like seaweed, eyes glowing faintly blue. He followed their boat silently, watching. Those foolish enough to call out to him found their gondolas rocking violently, as if the water itself had grown angry. Fishermen spoke of hearing bells toll from below the waves. Some nights, when fog rolled in thick as silk, the outline of a submerged palace appeared for a heartbeat, towers and windows gleaming in green light, before sinking back into the deep. The church called it madness, the scholars called it myth, but the people of Venice learned to leave flowers on the steps of the lagoon each spring, not in mourning, but in apology. Generations passed, yet the legend endured. Every doge after Lorenzo Contarini dreamed of drowning at least once. Some awoke screaming, others wept quietly, knowing they would one day share his fate. In the 1800s, when the palace was restored, workers reported the lower halls flooded overnight. The engineers blamed high tide, but the water inside was not salt. It was fresh, and it smelled faintly of roses. In the center of the main hall, a white mask floated face up, untouched by decay. They sealed the basement. No one entered again. Modern divers who have explored the canals speak of cold pockets beneath the surface, places where compasses spin and lights dim. One diver, in 1974, described finding a structure of marble far below, covered in barnacles and coral. It was like a palace turned upside down, he said, and on its gate, carved deep into the stone, were the words, "The sea remembers its own." He died a week later of unexplained drowning. He had been found in his bed, lungs filled with water. To this day, Venetians say that when the fog thickens and the bells of St. Mark's fall silent, you can hear another bell tolling faintly beneath the waves, a bell that belongs to no church, no ship, no living hand. That is when the drowned prince walks. They say he moves between reflections, seen only when the moonlight touches the canals just so. His eyes are not cruel, only sorrowful. He does not haunt for vengeance, but for longing, forever searching for the city that once called him son, and the father who refused to let him go. And so Venice floats, half alive, half dream, balancing between beauty and ruin. For every stone of her palaces rests upon the bones of something forgotten, and every ripple of her waters carries the memory of a prince who loved the lagoon too much to ever leave it. If you stand by the edge of the Grand Canal at midnight and the wind dies, you may hear his voice rise faintly from the depths, as soft as the turning tide. Venice, my bride, you are drowning too. Next time, we travel north into the forests and fog of an ancient realm to hear the tale of a king whose curse was not death, but pain eternal. The story of the King of Thorns awaits. In the cold heart of the northern forests, where the mist clings to the trees like old breath, and the wind moves as though mourning something it cannot name, there once ruled a king who could feel the pain of every living soul in his land. They called him the King of Thorns, for his crown was not of gold, but of suffering. His true name was Aldrich the Just. He was a warrior before he was a ruler, a man forged by battle and baptized in blood. When he came to the throne, his kingdom was broken, its people starving after years of war. Aldrich vowed to heal it. "If my people bleed," he swore, "then let me bleed with them." It was not poetry, it was prophecy. The curse began,
as curses often do, with mercy. One winter, a stranger appeared at the palace gates. He was cloaked in black, his face hidden beneath frost and shadow. He carried no weapon, only a staff wound with thorns. He asked to speak to the king, saying he bore a gift from the gods. The guards refused him entry, but Aldrich, always drawn to those in need, invited him in. The stranger bowed deeply. "Your heart is noble," he said, "but you do not understand what your people endure. You claim to love them, yet you stand above them. You call yourself their protector, yet you do not share their pain." The king frowned. "I have fought for them. I have bled for them." "Once," said the stranger, "but not as they do now." He lifted his staff and pressed it gently to the king's brow. The thorns pricked, drawing a single bead of blood. "Now you will never again be blind to suffering," he whispered. "You will feel what they feel, every wound, every hunger, every sorrow." Then the stranger vanished, leaving only the scent of cold iron in the air. At first, nothing seemed amiss. Aldrich continued his duties, riding through the villages, repairing what war had ruined. But as the days passed, he began to feel strange pains, sharp, sudden, and fleeting. His hands throbbed when the peasants worked the fields. His stomach burned when beggars went hungry. At night, he woke screaming from aches that were not his own. When a farmer broke his leg, the king's leg blackened with bruises. When a mother lost her child, Aldrich's heart seized, and he wept without knowing why. His physicians found no illness. His priests found no sin. The only explanation came from the old witch who lived at the edge of the forest. "You wished to carry your people's pain," she said. "Now you carry it all." Word spread quickly. The people called it a miracle. "Our king feels what we feel. He truly suffers for us." And for a time, Aldrich took comfort in their faith. He believed the curse could be borne with purpose, that by enduring their agony he could somehow lighten it. But pain does not divide, it multiplies. The kingdom grew large, and with it its suffering. Disease swept through the villages. Famine followed. Aldrich's body began to fail. His skin erupted in sores. His joints burned with fever. He coughed blood when others starved, felt his bones crack when soldiers fell in battle. His face grew pale and drawn, yet his eyes burned with pity. "Do not fear," he told his people. "Your pain is mine." Soon he could no longer walk. He was carried to the throne each morning, where he sat trembling as messengers brought news of sickness, war, and death. Each report wrung another cry from his lips. Blood trickled from his nose when executions were carried out. His hands clenched until nails pierced his palms when widows wept. His courtiers begged him to end it, to abdicate, to seek a cure, to turn away from his people's misery. But Aldrich refused. "If I abandon them," he said, "then all this pain will have been for nothing." In time, his throne itself began to change. The gold dulled. Cracks formed along its surface, sprouting thin black vines that twisted upward like veins. The vines hardened into thorns. Some claimed they grew from his blood. Others swore they were the stranger's curse made flesh. By the time Aldrich realized what was happening, it was too late. The thorns had encircled the seat entirely. And yet, he sat upon it still. Years passed. His kingdom fell into ruin. Famine devoured crops. Plague blackened the rivers. The people who once adored him now cursed his name. "Our pain feeds his throne," they said. "Our suffering keeps him alive." And perhaps, in a way, it did. For though his body withered, Aldrich could not die. His priests watched in terror as his flesh refused decay, as his wounds healed only to open anew. He begged the gods for release, but they were silent. The witch who had warned him returned one final time, old and trembling. "You took their pain," she said softly. "Now they have none left to give you, only hate." That night, the people stormed the palace. They found the king in the great hall, still seated upon the throne of thorns. His eyes were open, unblinking. Blood trickled from his crown, running down his face in thin crimson threads. The mob rushed forward, dragging him from the seat. But when they tried to burn him, the flames refused. When they buried him, the earth spat him back. So they sealed him instead. They locked the king within a crypt beneath the throne room, chaining him to the roots of the cursed vines that had sprouted through the floor. The hall was abandoned, the castle left to rot. Over centuries, the forest reclaimed it. Moss covered the stones. The wind carried faint sounds, groans that might have been trees or something deeper. Travelers who wandered too far north still tell stories of the ruins where no birds sing. They speak of a chamber buried beneath the earth, filled with thorns that move like breathing, and at its center, a pale figure sits upon a blackened throne, eyes half open, mouth frozen in a whisper. It is said that if you touch the vines there, you will feel pain, not your own, but the pain of others. Old griefs, lost voices, wounds that never healed. Some travelers leave gifts behind, a coin, a drop of blood, a prayer, hoping the cursed king will take a fragment of their sorrow with him. For even in endless torment, Aldrich remained what he had always been, a ruler who loved his people too much. And so he sits still, in the dark heart of the forest, bearing the weight of 1,000 years of suffering. The vines around him pulse faintly, alive with whispers. If you listen long enough, they say you can hear his voice beneath the rustle of the leaves. "Your pain is mine forever." The King of Thorns never died. He simply learned what every ruler must, that mercy, when taken to its end, becomes its own kind of cruelty. Next time, we move to the banquet halls of shadow and sin, where kings feasted with ghosts and drank from cups that should never have been filled. The tale of the Banquet of Shadows awaits. There are feasts that celebrate life, and there are feasts that summon death. Across centuries of royal history, kings and queens have dined beneath chandeliers of gold, their tables heavy with meat and wine, their laughter echoing against marble walls. Yet behind the glitter and the music, there are stories of feasts that never ended, banquets where the living and the dead shared one table. The most infamous of these took place in the winter of 1629, in the mountain kingdom of Ulbrichstein. The castle still stands, half buried in snow, its towers jutting like black teeth against the sky. Its last king, Reinhard II, was known as the Gilded Wolf. He was a man who loved two things more than his crown: pleasure and spectacle. His reign began with festivals that lasted weeks and hunts that left forests bare. The people adored him at first. They believed his extravagance was a sign of divine favor.
But famine came, then plague, then war. When his people begged for aid, the king answered with another feast. "We shall dine," he said, "and remind the heavens that we still live." The royal kitchens worked for 7 days. Servants slaughtered the last of the cattle, emptied the cellars, and filled the halls with firelight and the scent of roasted flesh. Guests arrived from every corner of the realm, nobles draped in velvet, generals, bishops, courtiers, all eager to forget the misery outside the castle gates. Snow fell in thick silence. The banquet began. Reinhardt sat at the head of the table, his crown tilted, his eyes fever-bright. Candles burned so low their wax spilled across the floor like blood. His voice carried over the music as he raised a golden cup. "Tonight," he declared, "no sorrow shall enter these walls. We feast for the glory of Albrechtstein and for the souls that envy us from beyond." The toast was met with laughter, but the laughter did not last. The first sign came when the torches flickered, though there was no wind. The musicians' notes wavered, falling out of tune. Then a strange cold passed through the hall, dimming the warmth of the fire. The guests shivered. Some claimed they smelled damp earth beneath the perfume and wine. Reinhardt demanded more music. He shouted, "Play until the sun returns!" But there was no sun that night, only darkness pressing against the windows. As the banquet continued, new guests began to appear. No one saw them enter. They simply were there, sitting at the far end of the table, their faces pale, their clothes wet as if from rain. One by one, the courtiers began to notice. The newcomers did not eat. They only watched. At first, the king laughed. "You see," he said, "even the dead crave my company." He ordered more wine, his laughter booming across the hall. But when one of the noblewomen leaned closer to a silent guest, she gasped. Beneath the stranger's mask, there was no face, only the hollow curve of bone and darkness. The candles guttered out. When they flared again, the guests were gone, every chair empty except for the king's. The food was cold, the wine had turned black. The hall was silent except for the faint drip of melted wax. And then, one by one, the courtiers began to fall. Some clutched their throats, others their chests. The king's physician found no poison in their cups, but their bodies were cold to the touch, as though they had been dead for hours. By dawn, the banquet hall was a grave.
The banquet of shadows was not a feast of death, but of memory. It reminds us that kings, no matter how grand their halls, cannot escape the hunger that haunts them, the need to be remembered, to be envied, even by the dead. And so, every winter, as the first snows fall over the mountains, the black hall of Albrechtstein glows faintly once more. The music rises, the laughter returns, and the dead dine again, forever feasting on the echo of life they once knew. Next time, we descend into the royal minds themselves to explore the thin border between genius and madness, and the kings who became prisoners of their own thoughts. The story of the madness of kings awaits. Power does not make men mad. It only strips away the masks that hide their madness. In every age, there have been kings whose crowns weighed heavier upon the mind than upon the head. They ruled from thrones carved not only from stone, but from fear, grief, and obsession. And when they fell, it was not their enemies who destroyed them, but the voices whispering from within. Madness has always been the silent heir to every kingdom. In the chronicles of Europe, it first appeared like a shadow behind stained glass, the story of King Charles VI of France, remembered as Charles the Beloved, before he became Charles the Mad. He had been young, bright, and golden When he took the throne in 1380, the people adored him. He rode through Paris with a smile that promised mercy after decades of war. But mercy is a dangerous thing for kings. It invites ghosts. One summer afternoon, while leading his army through the forest of Le Mans, Charles suddenly froze. His eyes glazed. Then, without warning, he drew his sword and struck down one of his own knights. The soldiers shouted, thinking an ambush was upon them, but there was none. The king screamed that traitors surrounded him, that demons wore the faces of his men. When they dragged the sword from his grasp, he collapsed, trembling, and remembered nothing. It was the first of many storms that would devour his mind. In time, Charles forgot his own name. He wandered his palace halls like a ghost, refusing to bathe or change his clothes, insisting he was made of glass. He feared that if anyone touched him, he would shatter. Servants were forced to move softly, wrapping the furniture in cloth to protect him from himself. He banned mirrors, for he claimed the reflection within them was another king, one who mocked him from the other side.
Only the king remained alive, sitting at the head of the table, staring at the corpses of his guests. The fire behind him had gone out. He whispered to himself, "They wanted to dine with me." When the servants finally dared to enter, they found him smiling faintly as if in triumph. "The dead envy the living," he murmured, "but tonight they were my equals." He ordered the bodies buried with honors and commanded the hall sealed for 7 years. But at night he returned to it. Servants would hear him talking softly behind the doors as though hosting another feast. They swore they heard chairs scrape, cups clink, and laughter, many voices, not one. The years passed, and the curse deepened. Each winter another banquet was held, though no invitations were sent. Servants would wake to find the great hall lit from within, music echoing faintly. Those brave enough to look through the keyhole saw shadows dancing where no bodies moved. When they opened the doors, the hall was empty, but the table was always set, the plates filled, the goblets brimming with dark wine. Eventually, King Reinhard vanished. No body was ever found, only his crown remained resting upon the throne beside a golden cup, its rim stained black. Centuries later, travelers who shelter in the ruins of Albrechtstein still speak of hearing voices after midnight. They say the wind carries the faint sound of clinking glass, and the smell of wine and smoke fills the air. If one follows the sound, it leads to the great hall, where, through the cracks in the wood, they can glimpse a long table, glowing faintly in the dark. The guests sit motionless, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. At the head of the table, the king raises his cup. "To the living," he whispers, "you'll join us soon." Then the candles go out. Scholars have called it legend. Historians blame madness or mass poisoning or isolation in the mountain winters. But even they admit that strange things linger in the ruins. Snow melts slower there, no bird lands upon the roof, and those who sleep within its walls wake to find their hands dusted with ash as if they had eaten from an invisible fire.
Yet the cruelest part of his madness was not the delusion itself, but how it spread. Courtiers began to mimic him, nobles whispered of strange dreams. The queen held court in silence, her ladies wearing veils so the king would not accuse their eyes of conspiracy. France, like its ruler, began to lose its mind. The throne became a mirror for the nation's decay, and every cracked reflection showed the same truth. When a king breaks, his kingdom follows. But Charles was not alone in his descent. Across the sea, in England, King Henry VI
was born into prophecy and paranoia. Gentle by nature, pious to the point of fragility, Henry wanted peace when his realm demanded war. His counselors whispered, his generals plotted, and his mind, too soft for the brutality of kingship, began to unravel. At first, he fell silent. For months, he spoke to no one, his eyes open but empty. When his courtiers tried to crown his infant son in his stead, Henry only laughed, a hollow sound, too knowing. "Another child for the slaughter," he said. "How many more crowns will you feed to the fire?" When he finally broke completely, he was found kneeling in the chapel, rocking back and forth, whispering the same word, mercy. He lost his throne soon after. They said when his enemies came for him, he smiled as though relieved. His madness had freed him from power, something no sane king could claim. And then there was King Ludwig II of Bavaria, the Swan King, as poets called him, though his story was no fairy tale. He ruled not with armies or decrees, but with dreams. He built castles that pierced the clouds, halls of mirrors and marble, bridges suspended over mist. He filled them with music, art, and silence, always silence. His courtiers called him eccentric. His ministers called him insane. He spoke to his servants as if they were actors in a play only he could see. He held audiences with ghosts of composers long dead. "They understand me better than the living," he once said.
When his debts grew and his advisors turned against him, they declared him unfit to rule. Soldiers came to arrest him at his castle by the lake. He went quietly, asking only to take one final walk. They found him hours later, floating face down in the water, his doctor beside him. The night was calm. No storm, no struggle. The verdict read, accidental drowning. But Bavaria still whispers that the lake claimed him, that the swans he adored pulled him below to join the kingdom he had built in his mind. Madness, it seems, is the only crown that never falls. History remembers these kings as cautionary tales. Yet behind every diagnosis and every whisper of possession lies a deeper truth, that perhaps their madness was simply a mirror turned upon the world they ruled. They saw too much, felt too deeply, carried the weight of too many prayers unanswered. Charles felt the terror of a fractured nation. Henry carried the guilt of 1,000 dead. Ludwig bore the grief of beauty in a world too cruel for it. Their crowns were not gold. They were thorns, ice, and music. And perhaps in the echo of their madness there is something holy. For each of them in their final moments spoke not of conquest or fear, but of peace. A peace so absolute it frightened those still sane enough to cling to the noise of the world. There are still rooms in old European palaces that remain locked, not for politics, but for memory. In the Château de Saint-Pol, the walls still bear faint scratches where Charles once drew imaginary sigils to protect himself from demons. In Windsor, a narrow passage remains sealed where Henry was heard conversing with invisible saints. And deep in Bavaria, beneath the ruins of Neuschwanstein, there is said to be a single chamber still glowing faintly with candlelight, though no one has entered in 100 years. The madness of kings was not madness at all. It was revelation, a glimpse of power's true cost. For when a man holds too much history in his hands, the mind rebels. And somewhere in every ruler's heart, there lingers the same question that drove them to the edge. If I lose myself, do I free my people, or only feed the curse? Perhaps that is why, even today, in the empty corridors of Europe's abandoned palaces, footsteps echo when no one walks there. The ghosts of mad kings do not rage. They whisper. They hum softly, as though still trying to remember the melody of sanity. Their laughter, faint and broken, rides the wind like a secret too heavy for heaven. Next time, we travel south to Spain's royal courts, where passion and guilt burned brighter than faith, and a dynasty was consumed by its own haunting. The tale of the Scarlet Court of Spain awaits. Spain has always been a land of contradictions, of saints and sinners, blood and prayer, beauty and decay. Beneath its golden sunlight runs a shadow older than empire itself, a darkness that once cloaked a royal house whose very name came to mean ruin. Historians call it the House of Red, though in its time it was known only by whispers. To the world, it was the Scarlet Court. Its origin lies in the 15th century, when the Spanish crown began to taste both glory and guilt. The Reconquista had ended, the New World had been found, and Spain's kings believed themselves chosen by heaven. But heaven, as history proves, has a cruel sense of irony. The founder of the Scarlet Court was King Alonso II, called El Rojo, the Red, for the crimson cloak he wore in battle. He was a man of passion and pride, a ruler who believed that blood was both currency and covenant. His motto was carved above every doorway in the royal palace: purity through fire. Alonso's reign began in triumph. He united provinces through war and marriage, and the Vatican blessed his throne. But as the years passed, that blessing began to rot. The fires of the Inquisition burned hotter, and whispers spread that the king's own court practiced the very heresies they condemned. It began with his queen. Isabella of Navarre was a woman of grace and intellect, but she carried a secret the church would have burned her for. She still prayed in the old ways to the Mother beneath, a goddess the Christians had buried under centuries of dust. She kept her altars hidden behind tapestries, her candles burning in the dark. When Alonso discovered her rituals, he was torn between love and faith. The priests whispered poison in his ear. They said, "If you let her live, her sin will spread." So he made her choose baptism or the pyre. On the night she was to confess, the queen vanished. They searched every room, every courtyard, every crypt. Only her crown was found, lying upon the throne, stained with something dark that was not wax. After that night, the king changed. He began wearing black under his crimson cloak. He dismissed his confessors and built a private chapel where he prayed alone for hours. Servants swore they heard a woman's voice answering him through the walls. When he emerged, he ordered the court to dine. It was a feast like none other, wine like blood, candles like stars. He toasted to heaven, but his eyes never left the empty chair beside him. As the courtiers drank, the air grew thick, heavy with perfume and smoke. Some claimed the scent was roses. Others said it was something sweeter, like decay. That night, the court dreamed of fire. From then on, the Scarlet Court lived by ritual. Every evening, the nobles gathered in the great hall to pray and drink from a single cup, a cup said to contain drops of the king's own blood. "To share my life," he told them, "is to share my truth." They obeyed, their lips red as wine, their eyes burning with a strange devotion. But power shared through blood is never pure. The nobles began to change. Their skin grew pale, their dreams vivid. Some awoke screaming, others murmuring prayers in tongues no one recognized. They started to see the queen in mirrors, standing behind them, her face serene and her hands folded over a heart that no longer beat.
The priests sent from Rome to investigate found the Scarlet Court silent and smiling. They returned to the Vatican within the week, speaking little. One cut out his own tongue before the journey was done. By the following winter, the palace stood nearly empty. The servants had fled. The few who remained reported lights moving in the windows long after midnight, and the sound of music without instruments. Those who ventured inside spoke of walls that bled when touched, and portraits whose eyes wept thin streams of red.
When King Alonso finally died, there was no funeral, no successor, no body. Only a sealed hall and a single throne covered in dried roses and ash. The people called it La Casa Roja, the Red House, and no one dared enter. But legends have a way of breathing. 2 centuries later, explorers reopened the palace. The air inside was cold, though the sun burned outside. In the dining hall, the long table still stood, cups in place, food petrified, yet untouched by rot. And at the head of the table sat the throne, its velvet faded to black, its gilded carvings dull with age. Upon its cushion rested a crown of gold and iron, fused to the seat by rust and time. The explorers reported a faint scent of roses. Then one of them, an Englishman named Avery, claimed to hear music. It came from the floor, he said later, like a heartbeat, deep beneath the stone. Within weeks of returning home, Avery's companions were dead. One drowned in a bath of crimson water, another found in his bed with his mouth stained red. Avery himself vanished. The only thing left in his room was a wine glass, half full, and a single rose petal floating on its surface. Today, the ruins of the Scarlet Court still stand in northern Spain, though few speak of it. The locals say the air above it shimmers at dusk, as if heat rises from unseen fires. No birds fly overhead, and when the wind passes through its broken windows, it carries a sound like quiet laughter, followed by the soft clink of glass on glass. They say the Scarlet Court never died. It simply changed its guests. Some claim that once every century, on the night the queen vanished, the palace glows red from within. Travelers who pass too close see figures moving behind the windows. Men and women in fine robes, their goblets raised in endless toast. At their head sits a king in black and crimson, a crown of rust upon his brow, smiling as he turns toward the shadows behind him. There, in the flicker of candlelight, stands a woman in white, her face hidden by roses. When the wind dies and the last echo fades, only one phrase lingers in the stillness of the valley: purity through fire. The Scarlet Court's curse was not born of wickedness, but of devotion twisted beyond salvation. For in the end, their sin was not that they sought heaven, it was that they refused to accept a heaven without each other. And so they remain, forever feasting in flame and memory, lovers locked in a kingdom of their own making, where every drop of wine is blood and every prayer ends in laughter. Next time, we turn to the tale of a child born nameless, yet destined to rule, a prophecy that doomed a continent before he drew his first breath. The haunting story of the nameless heir awaits. In the long and bitter history of monarchy, there are many tales of kings who died too soon and heirs who were never meant to rule. But none are as strange or as cursed as the story
of the nameless heir. His legend begins in the late 17th century, in a kingdom swallowed by fog and rumor. The chroniclers called it Valoria, a small realm wedged between mountains and sea, ruled by a dynasty so ancient that its bloodline was said to stretch back to the angels themselves. By the time King Aemon IV sat upon its throne, the line had thinned. His queen was barren, his court restless. He prayed every night for an heir, someone to carry the family's name, its power, its burden. And finally, his prayers were answered. But not by God. On the night of a lunar eclipse, when the moon turned black and the stars dimmed, the queen went into labor. The palace thundered with screams, not of pain, but of something deeper. Servants claimed that as the child entered the world, all the candles in the royal chamber went out. The air grew so cold that frost formed upon the sheets. When the midwife lifted the infant, she dropped him at once. His eyes were open, completely black, without iris or white. The queen, weak and bleeding, reached for him and whispered, "What is his name?" But no one answered. For when the king tried to speak, his tongue froze in his mouth. The child had no name, none that could be spoken, at least.
Priests were summoned. They anointed him with holy oil, but the liquid turned dark upon his skin. They attempted baptism, but the water froze solid in the font. The oldest priest, trembling, whispered, "Some children are not born of the womb, but of a wish too desperate for heaven to grant." King Aemon refused to listen. "He is my son," he said. "He will rule when I am gone." And rule he did, or rather, unrule. From the moment the boy could walk, strange things followed him. Servants found mirrors cracking in his presence. Animals grew restless. The palace gardens withered in patches shaped like footprints. He spoke little, but when he did, people obeyed without question. Even adults bowed their heads, trembling, unsure why. He grew fast, too fast. By the age of 10, he looked nearly a man. His voice was calm, his eyes bottomless. He was neither cruel nor kind. He simply was. His tutors reported that he never slept, only sat awake in silence until dawn. The king called it brilliance. The priests called it blasphemy. Then came the day of the royal naming ceremony, when the heir was to receive his title before the nobles and clergy. The cathedral overflowed with spectators. The air was heavy with incense and fear. The boy stood upon the dais, silent as the stone beneath him. When the archbishop asked, "By what name shall this prince be known?" the boy smiled. "You may choose one," he said, "but it will not matter." The archbishop frowned, turning to the king. "Majesty?" Aemon hesitated. "He shall be called..." But before he could speak, blood poured from his mouth. He fell to the ground, clutching his throat. The courtiers screamed. The boy did not move. He simply turned his head toward his dying father and whispered, "You promised I would rule." The king was dead before the bell tolled. From that moment, the child was known only as the nameless heir. No crown touched his head, yet no one dared defy him. Ministers who questioned his legitimacy died in their sleep. Armies swore loyalty to him without oath. When he spoke, his voice seemed to echo inside the listener's mind rather than their ears. He ordered the throne room sealed. He said it was too small. He held court instead in the great hall, sitting upon a plain iron chair that no one else dared approach. It is said that when he sat there, shadows gathered at his feet, and the torches dimmed until only his face could be seen. The kingdom changed. Laws grew strange. Trade stopped. The priests disappeared. The people whispered that the young king spoke not to men, but to something older, something that ruled long before thrones were built. One night, lightning struck the royal tower. The guards rushed inside and found the boy standing alone, unharmed, his hands raised to the sky. "It speaks," he said softly. "It remembers its name." The next morning, the sea rose without storm. The mountains groaned. The palace walls cracked as though something beneath the ground was trying to escape. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence fell. When dawn came, the kingdom of Valoria was gone. The land where it once stood was nothing but mist and ruins, the outlines of cities visible beneath shallow water. Travelers who crossed the region spoke of hearing bells tolling beneath the fog, and voices chanting a name no living tongue could pronounce. Some say the nameless heir ascended, that he was not human at all, but something born from the wishes and sins of his ancestors. Others believe he still walks the world, faceless and eternal, moving from age to age wherever ambition outgrows faith.
There are stories that every few generations a ruler is born who bears his mark. Eyes dark as midnight, unblinking, untouched by time. Such leaders bring prosperity, yes, but always at a cost. For their kingdoms never last. They burn bright, then vanish, leaving only silence behind. The priests call it blasphemy. The poets call it destiny. But the truth is simpler. The nameless heir was not cursed. He was the curse. To this day, travelers in the mountains sometimes find strange carvings in stone, circles of script too smooth to be human, too deep to be carved by hand. Those who touch them claim to hear a whisper, "Name me, and I will return." No one who speaks the words aloud has ever been seen again. And perhaps that is the price of the throne, to create something that outlives your name, even if it means erasing it forever. Next time, we enter the icy courts of the far north, where kings trade of their souls for warmth and ruled a kingdom made of frost and flame. The story of the Winter King awaits. Some kings are born in sunlight, others are carved from ice. Far in the northern reaches of the world, beyond the mountains where the air turns to glass and the sky burns green with wandering lights, there once ruled a monarch who bound his soul to winter itself. The people called him the Winter King. His true name was lost long ago, buried under centuries of snow, but his legend endures in whispers carried by the wind. They say his castle still stands, encased in frost, the fires in its hearths forever unlit, the throne room silent except for the slow cracking of ice. The story begins in an age when the north was still wild, when wolves ruled the forests and storms had names. The land was cold even in summer, but its people were strong. They lived by the sea, fished its frozen waters, and prayed to old gods with no churches. Their king was Eerie of the Frost bloodline, a man of steel and sorrow, whose crown weighed heavier with each winter that passed.
His realm was dying. The crops failed. The sun vanished for weeks, and the children were born weak and sickly. His people cried out for warmth, for mercy, for salvation. But Eric's priests could offer only words, and words do not thaw a kingdom. So the king went alone into the mountains, seeking the gods who had abandoned him. For 9 nights he climbed through blizzards in silence, his hands raw, his breath a ghost in the air. On the 10th night he found a cave whose mouth glowed faintly blue. Inside, the air was colder than death, and in the darkness at its heart sat a figure made of ice. It was not man, nor woman, nor God, but something older. Its face was smooth and shining, its voice like snow sliding from a roof. "Why have you come?" it asked. "My people starve, my kingdom freezes. I ask only for warmth." The figure tilted its head. "Warmth is the privilege of the living, but if you wish to rule forever, I can grant that. You will not starve, you will not feel pain, you will not age. In return, you must never let your fire burn again." Eric hesitated. He thought of his people, his land, his legacy. "If my cold heart can keep them alive," he said, "then take it." The figure reached out, touching his chest with a hand that burned with frost, and in that moment the king's heart turned to ice. When he returned from the mountains, his skin was pale as the moon, and his eyes glowed faintly blue. His touch froze water, his breath turned to mist even in warmth, but the snow stopped falling. The rivers thawed. Crops grew once more. The people hailed him as a savior, the king who had conquered winter. They built statues in his honor, sang hymns to his name. Yet none noticed how quiet he had become. He no longer laughed, no longer ate. He sat upon his throne and listened to the wind whisper through the halls. At first it was peace, then it was silence.
Years passed. The seasons refused to turn. Winter lingered like a dream that would not wake. The sun dimmed, the trees turned white, and the land that had been saved began to die anew, not of hunger, but of stillness. The people pleaded with their king to end the frost, but he could not. His heart no longer beat. The warmth that might have melted the curse had been traded for eternal life. When he realized what he had done, Eric wept, but his tears froze before they fell. The priests who had once praised him now called him demon. They tried to burn his effigy, but the flames froze solid. They fled south, leaving their godless king behind. And in time, even the people abandoned the palace, drifting away through endless blizzards until only the king remained. He wandered the empty halls, touching the walls as though seeking warmth that was no longer there. Every mirror showed him as he had been once, a man alive, full of promise. But when he blinked, the reflection turned to frost and shattered. Centuries passed. The castle became a glacier, the throne room filled with snow. Travelers who braved the northern wastes claimed to see a pale figure standing atop the ice, crown gleaming faintly beneath the aurora. He watched them silently, unmoving, like a statue carved from memory. And when they turned away, he was gone. Some say the Winter King still rules, a monarch without people, a guardian of cold eternity. Others believe he waits, dreaming beneath the ice, his heart pulsing faintly within its frozen cage. But the old songs tell a darker version.
They say the pact he made was not with a god, but with winter itself, a living thing that feeds upon warmth. And when his kingdom died, the cold spread beyond its borders, infecting every land that remembers his name. Even now, in the depths of harsh winters, when frost patterns crawl across windows like veins, and the air itself seems to listen, the old people of the north still whisper prayers, not to God, but to him.
Winter King, sleep. Winter King, stay buried. For they know that if he ever wakes, the sun itself will fail. Every snowstorm is his breath, every icicle is one of his thoughts, and every crown of the north, from then until now, carries his curse, that power without warmth is nothing but endless frost. The Winter King's throne still stands, they say, buried beneath miles of ice, its armrests rimed with hoarfrost, its seat unoccupied. But if you listen closely, if you press your ear to the frozen ground on a still night, you can hear a faint, rhythmic sound, slow and heavy, like a heartbeat trying to thaw. It is the sound of regret. And perhaps that is the cruelest curse of all, to outlive even your own warmth. Next time, we travel to the golden sands and blue skies of a faraway empire, where one queen's love for immortality brought ruin upon all who adored her. The story of the Queen of Eternal Summer awaits. There are rulers who burn with glory and fade, and there are those who burn so brightly that even death refuses to claim them. In the southern reaches of the world, where the air itself shimmers with heat and the horizon blurs like a mirage, there once reigned a queen who defied the turning of seasons. She made the sun her lover, the sky her throne, and in doing so, doomed her kingdom to endless light. Her name was Amara. The poets called her the Queen of Eternal Summer. She was born beneath a sun that refused to set. The year she came into the world, the rains never fell, and the fields turned to gold beneath a heat no man could bear. The priests proclaimed it a sign. The gods themselves had chosen her to rule.
As she grew, her beauty became legend. Her hair gleamed like sunlight upon bronze, her eyes the color of ripe wheat, her skin kissed with the warmth of endless day. When she walked through the palace gardens, flowers bloomed out of season. When she laughed, the air grew warmer. But Amara's beauty was more than human. It was unnatural. People began to worship her as they once worshipped the gods. They built temples in her image, carved her likeness into walls, and left offerings not at altars, but at her feet. The old gods grew silent. When her father, the king, died, Amara took the throne not in mourning, but in light. She declared the end of winter. "The sun shall reign with me," she said, "and I with it." Her first decree banished night from the capital. Torches burned through every darkness, and every dawn was greeted with hymns to her name. At first, it was paradise. The fields thrived, the seas sparkled, festivals filled every month. Gold poured into the palace like sunlight itself. The people sang, "Our queen brings summer wherever she walks." But light without shadow blinds. Soon the heat grew unbearable. Rivers shrank, crops withered. Children were born pale and weak, their skin burned from birth. The priests begged her to let the rains return, but Amara refused. "Would you have me share my crown with clouds?" she asked. "I will not bow to darkness." Then came the stranger. He arrived at dusk,
the first dusk in years, wrapped in a robe of silver dust. No one saw his face. He bowed before the queen and said, "You have taken the sun as husband, but you have forgotten his bride. Without night, even the sun will tire." Amara laughed. "And who are you to speak for the heavens?" The stranger lifted his head, and the light in the room dimmed. He said, "I am what comes after light, and I have come for what you owe."
The queen raised her hand to strike him, but her skin flared white-hot. Fire danced along her fingers. Her courtiers screamed as the flames caught their robes, yet she did not burn. When the light faded, the stranger was gone, and in his place stood a mirror, its surface black as cooled glass. The queen approached it. Her reflection smiled back, though she did not. "You have stolen their love," it whispered. "You will keep it forever." From that day, Amara never aged. Her beauty remained untouched, but her kingdom began to die. The sun no longer set. Its light became a fever. The crops turned to ash. The rivers boiled. The people fled to caves, cursing the queen who would not let night fall. Yet still she sat upon her throne, radiant, unchanging, her eyes glowing with the reflection of a sun that had forgotten to rest. Decades passed. Generations turned to dust. Still she ruled. Those few who dared approach her palace found it surrounded by endless heat. The walls shimmered like glass. The gates melted into strange shapes. Inside, they found a woman seated upon a golden throne, her body untouched by time, her crown fused to her hair. Her eyes stared ahead, wide and blind, fixed upon the horizon where the sun hung motionless. They say her court still exists, trapped in that eternal day. Servants stand frozen mid-bow, musicians with flutes pressed to lips that never move, everything bathed in a light that never softens. No wind stirs there, no shadow falls, only the hum of the sun, the sound of a god driven mad. Some say Amara's curse spread beyond her borders, that every drought, every dying field, every fevered sky still carries her memory. When the world burns, she breathes. When the air stands still with heat, it is her presence, watching. But others say she waits, that deep within her palace, beneath the molten stone, her heart still beats, slowly, faintly, waiting for the first night to come again. It is said that one day, when the last flame of her endless summer flickers out, the mirror she once touched will shatter. From its darkness, the stranger will return, and he will speak her true name, a name forgotten even by gods. When he does, the sun will finally set.
But until then, every sunrise is her crown, and every heat wave her breath upon the earth. The queen of eternal summer will reign forever, radiant and cursed, mistress of a kingdom where time itself has burned away. And if you listen closely on the hottest nights of the year, when even the stars seem to hide, you might hear her voice carried on the air. Do not pray for the sun to love you. It does not know how to let go. Next time, we return to the ancient highlands, where betrayal carved destiny into stone, and a kingdom's ghosts still cry through the mist. The final tale before the throne closes, the last king of shadows awaits. Every throne, no matter how gilded,
casts a shadow. And in the end, it is not the light that defines kings, but the darkness that survives them. The story of the last king of shadows begins where all kingdoms end, among ruins and silence. Long after empires had fallen and the names of kings had been worn smooth by time, there remained one realm untouched by history, a land forgotten even by maps. The locals called it Dareth. Its mountains were black, its valleys gray, and its sky perpetually dim, as though twilight had become eternal. There was no sun there, only a faint shimmer on the horizon that never grew nor faded. And in the heart of that half-lit world stood a castle, carved directly from the mountain, a fortress older than the bones of the earth. Within its hollow halls, the last king waited. His name had been erased, his banners torn down, his line ended. Yet he remained, seated upon a throne of polished obsidian. His crown was made of fragments, metal, glass, and bone. His face was pale, but not from death. He was alive, though the world no longer remembered why. He had been a conqueror once. His armies had devoured continents, his banners casting shadows over lands that no longer exist. But each victory demanded a sacrifice, and in time his conquests turned against him.
He had built his throne from the relics of the kingdoms he destroyed, a mosaic of other rulers' crowns. And when he sat upon it, he felt their weight. The voices of the dead began to speak, first in dreams, then in waking hours. They whispered their regrets, their warnings, their rage. At first he resisted. Then he listened. Years passed, then centuries. The world changed above him, but in the throne room, time froze. The torches never burned out. The dust never settled. The last king lingered, neither ruler nor ghost, trapped within the echo of his own power. He did not sleep, for sleep brought memory. He did not eat, for hunger belonged to the living. He sat and listened to the whispers that had become his only companions. Some nights, they accused him. Other nights, they begged him to remember who he was. And then came the final whisper, a voice unlike the rest. You are the end of kings, the last to bear their sins. The world above no longer needs thrones. It has learned to crown its own monsters. The king rose for the first time in an age. His steps echoed through the hall like thunder rolling across eternity. He walked to the great window that looked out upon his ruined realm. Below the mist swirled, and within it moved shapes. Faint outlines of palaces, armies, and cities long buried. The ghosts of every kingdom he had ever conquered. They were waiting. I will not repent, he said aloud, his voice breaking the silence of centuries. I ruled because no one else could. The shadows below stirred, whispering in unison. And what did it bring you? He had no answer. His gaze fell to his hands, still strong, still human, and for the first time he saw that his fingers cast no shadow. Then he understood. He was not the ruler of shadows. He was one of them. The moment he realized it, the throne began to crumble. The obsidian cracked, the floor split, and the torches dimmed. The voices grew louder, chanting in languages forgotten. He tried to speak, to command, to claim his crown once more. But his words vanished into the air. The light above him flickered, then went out. Darkness flooded the chamber, not the kind that blinds, but the kind that reveals. In that endless black, he saw them all, the cursed kings and haunted thrones that had come before him. They surrounded him in silence, their faces familiar and strange. The ghost of the first monarch who sold his soul for power, the queen who spoke to the dead, the drowned prince, the winter king, the nameless heir. Each one bore the mark of their sin. Each one had been swallowed by their throne. "You are us," they said, "and we are you." The last king lowered his head. Then, "Who rules now?" They smiled, 1,000 broken faces illuminated by a faint, impossible light. "No one rules," they said. "That is the curse's gift. It ends with you." For the first time in eternity, he felt something stir in his chest, a heartbeat. The mountain trembled. The mist below began to rise, consuming the castle, the land, the sky. The king looked upward, toward the darkness that had always watched him, and whispered, "Then let me rest." The light that followed was not fire nor sun, but something softer, something like peace. When it faded, the throne was gone. The hall was empty. Only the echo of his final breath remained, carried through the stone like a sigh of release. And as it drifted upward through the broken world, dawn came at last. The first sunrise in 1,000 years. The people who later wandered into the valley found no trace of a castle, only black stones scattered like bones across the earth. But when the light struck them, they glowed faintly, each one etched with a single symbol, a crown split in two. The era of cursed kings was over. Or perhaps it was only sleeping. For every age builds its own thrones, of gold, of iron, of words and wires. Every ruler believes they are the first to be pure, the first to be safe from the hunger that power breathes. And every age forgets how easily crowns turn to chains. The last king of shadows may be gone, but his whisper remains. In the heart of every leader, every empire, every soul that hungers for dominion. All thrones are graves. Sit if you must. And so ends Cursed Kings and Haunted Thrones, a chronicle of crowns forged from fear, love, and guilt. The curse does not end with history. It lives wherever power rests too long in human hands. Because kings may die, but the throne remembers.